Good evening. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeeper. I am Bishop-elect Vanessa M. Brown, and I am your moderator/host for this evening. We are so happy to have you here on tonight. We ask that you continue to like and share this Facebook page. We are also on YouTube, IG, and Twitter. And so you can share on all of those platforms tonight. And we continue on in the conversation that we started off last week, and we turned it into a series. And we're talking about how we maintain our emotional and mental health through this pandemic. So we're talking with some professionals that are here with us again on this week. And we're talking about tools that will assist us in mental and emotional health and wellness in the midst of this pandemic. And so we ask that while we are talking and while we're greeting you on Facebook Live and all the other platforms, that you would share, bring in your family, your friends, those that might need to hear this conversation. I know that it is a necessary conversation, even for myself. And so I am so grateful for our church family and for our fellowship. And I'm grateful for this conversation once again. Last week was robust and rich, and I know that this week will be the same. Please, again, make sure that you are sharing this conversation via Facebook, via IG, via YouTube, and or Twitter. We appreciate your support on tonight. I want to bring in our first guest that will be with us on tonight in the person of Dr. Paige Desrosiers. She is a behavioral health therapist, licensed social worker, clinician, and founder of Paige Therapy and Consulting. Dr. Paige, will you do me a favor and come and just greet the people on tonight?
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here tonight. I think that the best thing that we can do is to be able to gather and to come together because that gives us an opportunity to connect. I just want to say hello and welcome to everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Payee. And of course, we will not leave her alone tonight. We have Brother Lee A. Smith Jr., MDiv and licensed clinical social worker with his own company called Concentric Behavioral Health, LLC. Mr. Smith, please come and join us and please greet our audience tonight.
Good evening. I'm very thankful for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I think it's a very timely discussion. And as we look at the rise of the new variants, we may be in that lockdown again. Hopefully not. But we can talk about some tools.
Thank you so much, Lee. And of course, not a guest, always with us as much as he can, Bishop Carlton D. Pearson. He's an author, progressive spiritual teacher, and thought leader. Bishop Pearson, please greet our audience on tonight. You're muted, Bishop.
People have always tried to mute me, but I unmuted myself. I'm elated to be here tonight with all the wonderful guests as usual, and then to talk about self-therapy. How do you heal yourself or help yourself or provide hope for yourself without always having direct access to clinical assistance? You should find clinical help, but as a pastor for almost 40 years, every week is group therapy. This program tonight and last week and what we do each Wednesday is a form of therapy. We're trying to help people center themselves, face reality, realize that this is changing seasons and change just keeps on changing. So you make the change, manage the change, and then ultimately master it. Our country and the world, but particularly America, is going through biological and psychological warfare with the pandemic, which now they're saying is endemic and can be as regular as the flu or as the cold in which we've survived. So keep survival, arrival to survive, arrive, and thrive is what we want to see you do tonight and each night. So stay tuned, call a friend, tell them to tune in, and let's just have a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Bishop Pearson. And last but certainly not least is Bishop Yvette Adrian Flunder. She is our presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries and also the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California. Bishop Flunder, please greet all of our audiences that are with us tonight, Facebook, IG, Twitter, and YouTube.
So good evening, everyone. What a great joy to be in the company of people who I know and who know me. And one of the things that I think is so wonderful about this is it enables us to have what Bishop Pearson just framed beautifully, a family talk about a great many things that we're experiencing right now. I first want to give homage and appreciation to the life of Bishop Carl Bean, who passed away earlier this morning, who was the founder of the Unity Fellowship, and in so many ways, broke the ground for the acceptance and affirmation of the LGBT community and those who stand with us, among African Americans in particular. And so we speak his name as he now rests and dances and sings with the ancestors. It is my joy to be in the company of people that I respect, the way that I do, these that are with us tonight. And particularly because all of us in some ways or another are counseling people, sharing with people, whether we call it counseling or not, sharing with people who are dealing with, in many ways, bereavement that has to do, of course, with the loss of loved ones and friends, but as Bishop Pearson and others have said, with the loss of what we once did actively, the things that brought us joy, even simple things like dressing up for events, spending time together at sports events or entertainment venues, being able to go to church, which was for some of us also another entertainment venue, but certainly somewhere where we could be in and among people and show off our red shoes. It was an opportunity to be together in the company of people. Then there are the realities of managing all of the decisions that have to be made around children, whether or not they should go to school. If they go to school, are they in danger? Do they endanger their families if they cannot be vaccinated because they're too young? What it means to try to live a life where you're accustomed to working a job, and now you have to bring your children home because they've been exposed in some way in the schools unexpectedly. You got a job and unexpectedly they tell you that your child has to quarantine for the next 14 days. What in God's name do you do, right? Make decisions, what risks to take, what risks not to take, what gatherings can we go to? And then as someone said, I believe it was Dr. Pei earlier on in our conversation, how do we create times for group affirmation? To be together. To be together. Now that our be together is these Hollywood Squares boxes, how do we make time and make ways to genuinely be together? And that goes to how do you court? Some folks are of courting age. Praise the Lord. And how does that work at a time like this? So all of those things are things that all of us have heard about and heard from during this time. I am so confident that the folks that are with us tonight, because they've also done this and they have also been educated and informed in clinical counseling, how might we best deal with this personally, and how might we best be a blessing to those that will be with us online tonight and those that also serve in many ways. God bless you. We are so glad that you are here. We have incredible respect for you, and we trust that we will hear tonight some of the things that will help us. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. I want to shout out people who are already telling me where they're from. I can see you on Facebook Live telling me you're from Grand Prairie, Texas. You're from Southern California. You're from Charlotte, North Carolina. You're from Chicago. So many people are here. You're from Atlanta. We see you. And so we ask that you continue to share the Facebook Live and all the other social media platforms for us tonight. I'm going to get straight to it, Dr. Pei and Lee. I want to talk about this pandemic. I want to talk about tools regarding mental and emotional health. And I want to know what you all have seen. We are 18 months into this pandemic, 1 year and a half, right? 18 months into this pandemic. We started in March 2020, and now we're in September of 2021. And so as therapists, as behavioral health therapists, tell me what you've seen, particularly in our teenage population. I want to talk about our teenage population, but I want to talk about also, the adult population as well. So I'll start with Dr. Pei first. Tell me what you've seen in young people.
It's impacted young people in a variety of ways, right? So one of the things that I've noticed is with very young children that it's really kind of interesting because they like structure, and we're unable to provide structure. So all of the areas of our lives, play happens in the same place as dinner, in the same place as rest, so they don't get a chance to go and have things, go have it be compartmentalized. The other thing is that it's really hard for kids, but it's hard for adults too, to be consistent. And, consistent with the hand washing, consistent with the mask, consistent with social distancing and stuff. We all slip. So that means we start off doing it and then we're like, we get comfortable and then we kind of like forget. So I think that that's really particularly hard for young people, for teens. And the other thing is that I think that one of the things that I'm noticing is that there's a certain social awkwardness that's happening. You know, we kind of like don't, both feet are in the same shoe. We kind of like don't know what is appropriate anymore, because certainly it is no longer appropriate to go and to hug people and to come up close and stuff. And so we're here not knowing what to do with our hands, not knowing, you know, whether to lean in or step back. Where's the, do we fist bump or whatever. But the thing is that I think that I've seen some social awkwardness, and I've also seen a tremendous amount of isolation. We've gotten more quiet. People have gone into their huts, they've gone into their little cubby holes, they've gone into their rooms, and they don't come out. And this isolation is having a tremendous impact on people. You know, it's having a tremendous impact on the young, but it's also having a tremendous impact on families, because even though they're in the same space and living in close quarters, they're not connecting. Okay. And that lack of connection is the thing that is producing anxiety. It is producing depression, and it is also making people feel very alone, even when we live in clusters, and very disconnected. So what we've done is that we no longer gather, and gathering is so central to who we are. So we gather to solve problems. We gather that we can't solve on our own. We gather to celebrate. We gather to mourn. We gather to mark transitions. We gather to make decisions. We gather to show strength, to show support. We gather to build, you know, community. And without that, and we gather to say goodbye, and we gather to welcome. So without those kinds of markers, it becomes really hard for people to connect. And people become sort of disengaged and sort of sit back. So that's one side. The other side is, for the first time, families are stuck together, and they have had to get to know each other again. And they have had to go back to board games, and they have had to go back to telling stories. And all of a sudden, connections that wouldn't have happened, there's a place for them to happen. You know, so people have spent more time with their children. They may get on your nerves, but you get to know them in ways that you maybe had not before. So we're seeing a whole bunch of things happen, and, you know, and it happens in a ripple effect. So some of it is the isolation, but some of it, people have become closer because they've realized that they were not connected in the first place. Therefore, they're now making an effort. And the other thing I think that's really fantastic is that if we didn't believe in the ability of this medium to connect people, I've been doing 4 groups for the last year and a half, and this medium is real. People might think that, oh, well, I'm not going to really be engaged, and I'm not going to, maybe at first you're not, but then you do. And it's real, and it is connection, and it feeds that place in our soul.
Thank you, Dr. Pei Lee.
Sorry about that. I was having difficulty unmuting myself. I like what Dr. Pei said in her opening. I've been seeing a lot of anxiety and depression in teens. There is a sense of unassuredness about, you know, how this is going to end. If I'm going to lose parents, if I'm going to lose grandparents, those children that are being raised by grandparents are also worried about bringing something home to the grandparent. So it can be a very, very tenuous time. Families are losing members simultaneously, which, unless they were in a bus crash or a plane crash, seldom happens when you lose 3 family members all at one time or in rapid succession, all dying from complications of COVID. And then the reality that people are transitioning without being able to have family near. someone to hold their hand, someone to talk to them. One of the things I think most of us hope is when we leave the planet, we'd like to be old and have our family around us, and then transition on. But this pandemic has made it such that that's not the reality for so many people, that they are transitioning alone. And it's at a time when they can't speak because they're intubated. They maybe be able to acknowledge you, but getting their last words out is almost impossible because of the intubation. So with spouses and the surviving members of the family, there's a great deal of sorrow because they weren't able to be there for their loved one, especially spouses who've been together for a very long time. They definitely thought that when it was one of our times that the other person would be there, and to be separated and not be able to see the person that means so much to you is a devastating thing. And then the other big thing that's affecting just about everybody is the level of isolation. When we go through lockdowns and you can't go anywhere, or you can only go to the grocery store, that puts a lot of stress on the family. It puts a lot of stress on people who are single and living alone. I always worry about those 20 and 30 somethings in large cities like Atlanta, where I'm living. Most of us have moved away from our families of origin, and we may or may not have a good social network that we can connect to. So during times like COVID, you have so many people who are just so isolated. They can't go to church. They can't gather in small groups. So the things that they would normally do to kind of help relieve their stress, they aren't able to do. And that can it can make life very difficult. The other big issue that is happening is the intimate partner violence. While Dr. Payee is correct, with families that are there, they're having to get to know each other in ways they've never learned each other before. But at the same time, if a family has a previous history of violence, when you shut those people in together, it's a very volatile situation. The other piece with children is we are able to find out what's going on in the home when children come to school. And so when we can't see children, they don't come to school, they don't have anyone to talk to outside of the family, there's no accountability on what's happening with these children that are living in volatile situations. I don't want to go on much longer, but that kind of gives you an opening of where my perspectives are.
Thank you so much to both Dr. Payee and to Brother Lee. I'm going to allow Bishop Flunder and Bishop Pearson to weigh in on what they just heard. And then I'm going to move, because someone is asking a specific question. I want us to get that in if you all know that answer.
Well, I can say what I would like to add, because I think we've covered an enormous gamut of the ills and issues that people are experiencing and feeling, and in a broad way. We are speaking to so many levels of what is going on. And I know we're going to move to what ways in which people can be helped and sources and ways in which they can. But I'd also like to add to this reoccurring theme that I hear from people who at one time in the recent past pushed back against social distancing and masks and vaccinations and They wrote about it. Many of them had talk shows on radio and online and on television and such. And now many of those strong pundits are gone. There's just a long line of them that have died from COVID complications. And they have left wives and children and spouses and such the like, who are saying now, I wish that I had not taken the tack that I took around this. And they are crying out to others and saying to them, don't do what I did. They have this incredible grief, and not just grief, there's some shame associated with that, and a loss that includes trying to give words around something they were so strongly opposed to, which is an interesting situation, I think, for people to be in. Many of those are widows, by the way, and their children who are aware of that reality. So I want to place that out there, because as we start talking about solutions or giving help and support, a lot of that will be people who at one time were a complete enemy to doing anything that has to do with some of the things that you all have lifted up in terms of serving people who are in this COVID with us. So I'd like to just add that piece.
Thank you, Bishop. Bishop Pearson? You're muted, sir. You're unmuted now.
Okay. I think all of us, and I listened carefully to what everybody said and agree with it. The country at large and the culture at large has never felt more clumsy or cluttered. In 2 or 3 days, we'll recognize the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which traumatized the country and made many of us lose trust in the government itself, because America is not used to on-land tragedies like that, acts of terrorism. We're not used to what happened on January 6th. We doubt and question everything. And so we're so clumsy and so klutzy that we're being forced to reconsider who we are as a people. And again, as I often say, what we believe and why we believe it, how those beliefs add to or subtract from the quality of our lives. Even something as common as wearing the mask, and people are smelling their own breath. They're having to do some self-reflections. We're dealing with respiratory issues. We're suffering with, I call, spiritual halitosis from ongoing truth decay. Because we're finding out things we thought were true are not true. We're finding out people and institutions we thought were trustworthy aren't. So we need some orthodoxy and some orthodontists to help us straighten out the truths and truths of our faith. I think that's what the higher source of force or God, universe, whatever, is imposing on the species. We're going through an upgrade. And I want to encourage everybody who feels downgraded that we're ultimately going to be upgraded as a species, upgraded as a culture, upgraded as a country, but not without the demolition. So gear yourself, guide yourself, guard yourself for the transition. Be willing to make it, if not eager. You may not like the change. You may resent it, but if you resist it, you will lose. All the people that are trying to hold on to the past or say, let's go back to normal, we'll never go back to that normal. We have to help create a new normal. And as I say, be careful what images you allow to prevail in your mind, because images are like magnets. They literally draw you toward them. If the image is victim consciousness, that I can't trust, I'm not trustworthy, I don't like my own breath, I don't like my mask, I don't like having to overly sanitize, I don't like socially distancing, roll and grow with the flow, even when it becomes a flood. That's an intentional thing. So people are doing self-medication, but they're using alcohol or weed or a piece of chocolate cake. I am for self-medication, but more importantly, self-meditation. Think it through, pray it through, wait it, walk it through, and don't be excessive in anything, including fear, and not stupid with faith. There's a balance out there that we all have to personally, because we can't get to church, as has already been said, and hang out with each other and shout together and get that group therapy. We're kind of walking it alone, having to, again, smell our own breath. And now we know why everybody was offering us gum and stuff. So we're having to reconsider all that. I think that's an important observation that is being imposed upon us, but it's healthy. So do a lot of self-reflection and don't be so hard on yourself. And then don't take yourself so seriously. Kind of laugh more, lean more, or relax as much as you can. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Bishop Pearson. And so before I start asking for tools from both Dr. Pei and Lee, I want to bring up two things that were brought to my attention. And someone said, let's talk about the children who are 12 and under and cannot get vaccinated. How does this impact this demographic mentally and emotionally, especially having to go back to school now? And let me just provide some context that there are so many children that I know under 12 that are not vaccinated because they cannot be and have returned back to school. And the amount of anxiety that exists because they know that they have to stay away from the kids and they need to social distance is enormous. So I want to know, Dr. Pei and Lee, do you all have any answers to the question?
Sure, I'll take a stab. For very young children, this is difficult because they cling to whomever and wherever they go. It's hard to keep them apart because that's the way children are. But the reality is, at first we were told that children couldn't get the virus and children couldn't pass it on. And then conventional wisdom said, no, that's not the case. So it makes it more difficult when we have to use language that scares children. And so I would encourage you, if you have small children, to be mindful of how you're discussing the pandemic, your word choice, how much of that news that they're watching with you, because you never really know how exactly that's affecting them. Because one of the first things they think is that mommy or daddy is going to die. Especially if they know that their parent has an underlying health condition, which is just simply hypertension. It could be as simple as hypertension. So it can cause a great deal of worry with children. It can cause some sleepless nights. Some children seem to like the mask. Others don't like the mask, or they put it on, they take it off. And at the end of the day, it really hasn't done what it's supposed to do. But how much can you expect small children to do? It's causing us to have to rethink our classroom size as well. Packing 30 and 35 and 40 kids into one classroom is just not practical anymore. And then virtual education works for some students, but it's difficult for other students. So somehow we have to have a hybrid model that allows the students to meet in small groups versus all in one classroom. And then to also have time at home, which complicates the life for parents who are working, finding childcare, consistent childcare, or never knowing when the schools are going to be open or closed. And you just wake up one morning and they say the kids are going to be at home. And now you've got to figure out, what to do with them for the rest of the day. It becomes very difficult, especially if you have a one-income household or your household needs both parents working in order for you all to survive. So it puts a great deal of stress on the family. Hopefully, the schools will become more of an ally to families. And when they put together their practices, they will pull in social workers or pull in psychologists to kind of talk through, how this policy is going to impact the people that have to live through it. Because something may seem great on paper, but it may not be practical in the lives of everyday people. Thank you.
I was just thinking while you were talking that the thing that's happening is that not only do we have no roadmap, but we're now asking children to put a level of responsibility on them that for many of them are, it's too young for them to be able to think about the consequences and how if I don't do this, da, da, da. What it does do is create a lot of fear, right? And children process information differently than adults. That means that they get all of the messages that you intentionally give them, but they also get messages from the media. They get messages from their friends. They get messages and they conflate all of these messages and come up with their own story. And Lord knows it sounds like one of those Medea stories, where, and Jonah and the whale and da-da-da-da, and it's like, where did you get that? Because they're getting all kinds of messages. And even when we try to be responsible, you have to really think about it in terms of human development. That age group that we're talking about elementary school children. We're talking about junior high school children. Have you seen how they behave for recess? These are the same children that did not observe anything, I mean, when my son was that age, we'd send him to school. How could you come back without your coat? And have that go missing. The kinds of things that they the kinds of things that they forget, the kinds of things that they don't do, that level of organization and the level of consistency that we're asking for children to do is something that adults struggle with, right? So that's one issue. The other thing is that how are they internally processing this, right? Because I think that once you tell children that they can't come next to people and, we're isolating them and stuff, there's a sense of inherent rejection that's in that. We want to put it in the most politically correct way that, it's for safety, but, so they can't hug grandma and they can't, they can't touch anybody and they have to wash their hands afterwards and stuff like that. And I'm saying that there is a sense of rejection. There is a sadness that they too are grieving, because they're still children. They require touch. They require, being held. Okay. And the other thing is that so much of the way that they interact with the world is tactical. Right. And we have to remember that because what we're adding is a layer of sadness, a layer of worry, a layer of anxiety. And we see it, them demonstrating that at a much younger age. Okay. And we're not doing so well because the adults don't quite know how to handle this. Right. So then you have adults who our motive, like people are saying all kinds of things, and I get that. But the thing is that it's the core issue is fear. So fear, the parents are terrified that their children are going to catch something. But then, okay, fear is the emotion, but what you're doing is you're yelling at this child. Why did you forget this? Where's your mask? Why did you do this? And all this child can hear is I've done something wrong. Okay, and fear has a way of showing up really in strange ways in families, right? So either we overdo or we underdo. We try to push something, but maybe we push too hard. And the thing is that we're afraid. We don't deal with our fear, and then we go ahead and we grab onto straws and issues that are smaller issues, right? The issue isn't whether or not you should wear a mask in your personal freedom. That's not the issue. The issue is I'm already scared. That mask makes me feel vulnerable. And now, I feel judged. And now there are so many things that I have no control over that the one thing that I have control over, I'm going to make a whole big deal about it. Right. So that's how it gets played out. And then, you have folks who we've been in this for a while. People are tired. We're all tired. We really did not know when we started that we would be in for this long and that it would impact all areas of our lives. Right. So fear makes people behave in strange ways, but power and powerlessness also makes them behave in strange ways. Okay. And what we're really mad at, we can't rail at. Right. So that means that we're going to go ahead and rail at what we can and who we can. And the people that we're mad at are not the people that are responsible. And the people that we're making scapegoats, they're not scapegoats either, but they're easy targets. All right. That's all I wanted to add to the conversation.
That was wonderful, Dr. Pay. We appreciate that. And people are commenting on both your statements and just saying that, one guy says that the same words that you use, Dr. Pay, are the same words that his nephew used, 12-year-old nephew. And, suicide is up. People are tired, and so there's several other questions that we want to go into. But I just want to see if Bishop Flunder and Bishop Pearson have anything to add to the pieces that were just stated by Dr. Payee and Lee. And if not, then we'll just move to some tools that they can give us.
Just one thing, because my baby grandson lives with me, as you all know, and when things get all haywire, from the time that he was a little bitty guy, when he was, 1 and 2, and there was a loud noise in the house, like a smoke alarm or something like that happened in the house, he would always find one of us and run to somebody for safety and security, because it's loud, which means something is really wrong, if you understand what I mean. And I think that more can be said to help parents and people who are in responsible places in the school systems and such. How can we find ways in all of this to be able to be the person that children can run to in this time? Because they are afraid and they are still looking to us. And there's a struggle when we are also destabilized by this reality. How can we work on ourselves in a way so that we can be the go-to person for our kids when they, and I know that's a tall order. I understand what I'm saying, because I'm one of those parents, grandparents till yet. How can I deal with my inner self enough to be able to be the person that our kids can run to? Because they do have to have someone to run to in the middle of a difficult situation. So I want to put that out there to all of the parents who also feel like they need somebody to run to. And those of us who are struggling ourselves, how do we balance that and speak to our own internal struggles with all of this, to be in some way available to our children when they, just like how they used to run and grab our leg when they heard a loud noise. How do they run to us now, given everything? So I know we have other questions out there, but I'd just like to lay that out there too for our participants and for the people who are listening and want to write in comments or questions about this same reality.
Bishop, you're muted.
It's interesting, Bishop Flunder, that you brought up your grandson, because before you did, I was sitting here thinking about my grandmother, who I watched President JFK's funeral with in November of 1963, and then she was dying with cancer and died that following January, just a few months after. The reason that was important to me because that was the first election I remember thinking about as a kid. and what an example we parents, grandparents, godparents can and should be to our children with how we respond rather than react to whatever tragedy. The first tragedy that I remember was Bishop Mason, founders of the Church of God in Christ, was like a god to so many of us, died in 1961. Then my grandmother got sick with cancer. And I remember during the election, I said to her, Big Mama, who you voting for? And she couldn't think of his name. She pointed at a big billboard that had President JFK's picture on it. So instantly I loved him because she loved him. And then we sat together in her house. I was there that weekend and watched his funeral. And I kept looking back at her. She would go in and out of the kitchen, but she was sick and she was dying. And then she did die just that next January. And I remember I was confronted with death, but I took my cue from her and from her daughter, who's my mother, and my father, and my aunt, who's her sister, who became our grand. I really watched my grandparents and my parents and my older siblings' response to life and to death. So it's important for us to remember that, and I've been counting my bruisings along with my blessings. And the only reason I'm counting the bruisings because I remember my trainer teaches me that you have muscle memory. I had lifted weights, and then I tore a rotator cuff, and I couldn't lift weights for a year. And when I went back to lifting weights, without telling me, my trainer had me start at the same weight that I stopped. And I didn't realize that till I was finished. And then he explained that to me, and I said, how in the world, why would you start me on the same stuff the same weight I've already lifted? He said, because your muscle has memory. Your muscles have memory. You can always repeat what you've already gone through. And when you think of what this country, what our culture, particularly African Americans, have already gone through, slavery, Jim Crow, deprivation, discrimination, and how our parents and grandparents and godparents survived all of that, that lesson and those teachings still hold. But we have to remember, and at my age, I'm 68, most of my pillars and pillows are gone. The pillars of the men and women who were the greatest pillars of my life, and the pillows of whom I would lay my head, the pillows and pillars, they're all gone. So now we're having to assume the responsibilities of being able to respond to whatever life, not react. So the one thing I do is I like to hug my daughter's 25 and she still lives here. My son lives there, but I hug them a lot. I text them a lot. I'm constantly reassuring, reaffirming, and that's what we need to be doing with our children. Not fussing at them and talking terror and be careful and where's your mask, but holding, hugging, affirming, confirming them constantly, helping them with the mask, giving them a little break, walking and talking them through, and not spewing our fear, our anxiety, our anger in their midst and in their heads all the time. We can be therapists to our own children and grandchildren.
Excellent, Bishop Pearson. Thank you so much for that. And I hope that we all heard it, because I know that the Facebook Live is coming up with questions and people are very concerned about their children. So before Dr. Payne and Lee gives us tools, I want to run these two questions by them to see if they have any insight. One says, how to deal with a first grader who is regressing in age in some ways to deal with all of this. And the other one is, how do we explain to children why parents are fighting over wearing masks? So either one of you or both of you can take a stab at it. You're muted, Payne.
Let me take the easier question. The first grader who's regressing in age in some ways to dealing with this, okay? I think that first grader is not the only one. A lot of us have regressed from a prior level of functioning to dropping down to a lower level of functioning, okay? And what works for this first grader will also work for those who are not in first grade. And that is that if that's the place that they have regressed to, then that's the place that you start with them and help them to regain ground. For a first grader, there are some excellent child therapists who work with children, who do stuff like drawing therapy and play therapy and allows them to express themselves. What you shouldn't do as parents is don't shun them, don't shame them, don't make them afraid of, of just being where they are, right? So if they have to regress to that, think of it as something that is temporary. And in some ways it is healthy. It's saying that I can't cope with what's going on right now and that I need something that makes me feel a little bit more comfort. Okay? Or I need a little bit more help. Or I need a little bit more attention. And it's not just kids, it's adults too. It's adults, it's teens, and I need a little bit more gentleness because this feels too harsh. Okay. So the other question was, somebody asked whether the schools were equipped with a mental health side for what the children are dealing with. Okay, this is new, but the schools where they're able to, because there's a lot of difference in terms of schools, school districts, how much money that they have for that kind of extra kind of thing. But that's a good place to start, because if these people, if the teachers and the assistant teachers and the social worker get a chance to see your child, they might notice something that you haven't noticed because it might have been slow, or they might notice that your child is not at the same pace as everyone else or gets easily frustrated. And you as a parent, sometimes we see it first, and if we see it first, we need to find help for them, right? And support, and extra support. But if we don't see it first, we need to trust those who do, and not fight them, but keep the focus on getting what your child needs ultimately. So can we take this? Okay, that's not my question. Any other questions about kids?
No, that's good. Thank you, Dr. Faye.
All right.
Lee,
Which question did you want me to address?
whichever one you feel comfortable addressing.
Okay. We talked about regression. I'll pop through schools and mental health, and then explaining to children why parents are fighting over wearing a mask. The sad part about schools and mental health is that schools have social workers, but because of budget cuts, instead of having a social worker that was stationed at each school, now school social workers cover 3 and 4 schools. And while the students always say they never know when the social worker is going to be there. And of course, they could ask for information, but that's a resource for them that some of them do reach out to. But when you've got a social worker that's covering 4 schools and it's the social worker for the entire school, it does make things really difficult, especially now, because school social workers and teachers are our first line for child abuse and lack of resources at home, because they see the children every day. When you don't see them, you don't know whether or not they're eating, especially if you know that that some children, the only lunch they were getting or the only meal they were getting was a lunch at school. So some schools have become creative in that they still fix lunch. They take the lunch out and deliver it, or at least they were doing it when we were in lockdown. There was a central location where you could go and get that lunch. And they were giving the children meals for 2 or 3 days and not just one sack lunch. I think the best way to try and get a child to understand why parents are arguing about the mask, now I can't explain the fighting part, but why they are arguing about the mask is to get the child to think about when he or she has to make a choice. Some choices are forced, and some choices you can make at your leisure. And in the United States, we say that each person has an inalienable right to manifest their own destiny. And this mask has become an indication that a person's right is being taken away. So I would talk about, times when you give the child options, and sometimes when there's only one option. We're going to do this, or we're not going to do anything. We're going to eat this, or we're not going to eat anything. And how that made the child feel, I think that would help him get in touch with, what adults might be feeling when they say they feel like their rights are being taken away. Hopefully we will get to a point where now that people are coming back to work, workplaces are demanding that workers either be tested on a regular basis or be vaccinated. Now, I think that's going to be the biggest help to those who are anti-vaxxers, because either they're going to have to find a new job or they're going to have to comply. And if we can get them to comply, it would definitely help stop the variations of this virus. The more that it is alive in the population, the more chance that it has to mutate. And then when it mutates, then there's a possibility that the vaccine may no longer work, because vaccines are created to attack certain viruses, but there's not a broad spectrum vaccination that will attack every possibility of COVID variations, because they don't exist. All you know about is what the virus is doing right now. And so it's hard to even project, when you're trying to bring a vaccine to market, what people are going to face. With the flu, we have years of data, and so researchers kind of know, what the flu is going to be like this season, and which flu vaccine is going to be effective. But with COVID, it's an ever evolving issue. And so we're trying to keep up with the science, but the science is also trying to keep up with life, because we're all evolving. The virus is evolving. And then most of us want to get back to some semblance of normalcy. Going out to dinner, going to see a movie in a theater, going to a jazz fest. We just had Black Pride in Atlanta, and there was concerns about whether or not COVID protocols would be followed. But at the same time, people long for and miss those things. I think one of the things that we're talking about at Rehoboth is, how do we go back to church? When do we go back to church? What does it look like? Will it be hybrid? Will it be still virtual until the beginning of the year? And then getting people to be honest about, how they're feeling about virtual worship. Because I know at first, virtual worship was okay. But the longer this went on, not being able to assemble with those people that I have come to know and love in that sacred space, it almost makes you unplug from church, because what you're being given is like third rate from what you're normally experiencing, especially if you're in a denomination or a ministry that's very charismatic, where there's lots of music, lots of movement, impartation of spirit. When you don't get that, it definitely feels like you're missing something. that kind of helps you get through the week, depending on how difficult it is. And I think for a lot of people, if they were able to reconnect in that sacred space, it would help with the depression. It would help with the anxiety. It would help with the isolation, because for many of us, that's what church has always done. The faith community was there when we couldn't go anywhere else. The faith community, we could go and put on a suit and be accepted and celebrated. So at a time when we really need to lean on our faith community, it's caused us to be very creative about how we do that and how we offer support and then how we get support.
Thank you, Lee. Bishop Flunder?
Just one thing. I wanted to go back to the question and the number of questions that I see and just lift up about folks talking about their children. Lift up an incident that happened in the not too recent past where the mandate for masks in the schools was very seriously problematic for parents. And 3 fathers got together and took some zip ties, the kinds of things that are used for handcuffs by the police, and went to the school in an effort to do a citizen's arrest of the administrators at the school for the mandate that they were administering where their children are concerned, and created a scene. You know, the police had to be called, they had to be arrested, taken into custody, these fathers, but all in the company of their children. And it sort of brings me kind of back to what I seem to be, and I want to advocate to catching some of the things that these parents are saying. Brings me back to what is our responsibility? Back to something Bishop Pearson said also. When my grandmother was dying, my mother had to help me. When my mother was dying, I had to help my children, had to help my daughter, right? In the death of my mother. Didn't mean that I wasn't suffering in both situations, both as a child and then as a parent. But then what was my responsibility then to my child to help see them through while I am concomitantly struggling also at the same time that my child is suffering. So I want to put that out there, because I think about, what about this kid? How is he now that his daddy has come to the school to arrest the people at the school? And that means a whole lot of ranting and raving is going on at home. Before that happened and since that happened, how does he then, to you all's point, manage the authority figures in his life that are in conflict with one another? It's like when your mama just wants to whoop your daddy, and your daddy is calling your mama by ungodly names, and you walk in on it, and you walk in when they got the plate in the air, about to throw the plate. What does that do for a child? And there are a lot of those kinds of realities happening right now, in conflict in the families, and now conflict in the schools in relationship to all of that. So I want to put that back out there again, and I don't want to hinder the questions that are coming, because many of these questions are sort of in and around some of the concerns.
So, first of all, I want to thank our Facebook Live audience. I want to thank our IG audience, our Twitter audience, and our YouTube audience. I realize that this is a very emotional conversation for many to be having, to be listening to. People have questions, and anxiety is still already high. I want to thank those who are in our Facebook Live chat who are encouraging one another. Thank you so much for encouraging each other. As you see people make comments, you are encouraging them. We are very appreciative of that. All of you that I see encouraging one another here on this platform. And so we want to move to some other questions again about children. But I want to make sure that I leave enough time for some tools to be said and had. And so before I do that, let me just go to the tools. Dr. Payee and Lee, of course, Bishop Flunder, Bishop Pearson, what are some tools? What are some tools that can be used through this pandemic, given all of what we've said, all of what Dr. Payee has said, all of what Lee has said, all of what Bishop Pearson said, all of what Bishop Flunder has said? What are some tools to help us navigate through this season, because it is not yet over?
I don't mind jumping in and starting this conversation. So to the parents, I would say, get the facts. Spend less time operating on emotions and feelings. And you've heard us say time and again, all of us, Bishop Pearson and all of us, and Bishop-elect Vanessa and all of us that have been together, this is not a religious issue. This is a public health issue. Get the facts. Even if you're afraid, get the facts and talk to your children about the facts and help them to understand about the facts. And yes, God is a healer. Hallelujah. God is a healer. We know that God is a healer. At the same time, we also know and understand the specter of death and what that really means. Help your children get the facts and talk to your children in ways that they will understand the facts, and then embody by example for them the best care that you can give yourself. And in vis-a-vis teaching them to give it to themselves. That's the thing that comes off the top of my head. Get the facts. Don't fall for the old wives' tales, whatever they are. Do your work. Study this epidemic. Get the facts and then share those facts with your children.
Dr. Payee, thank you, Bishop Flunder. Before you go, Dr. Payee, I just want to reiterate something that Bishop Flunder said. This is a public health issue. This is not a religious issue. This is a public health issue. And I think that if we can begin to see it that way, then perhaps we can begin to move the needle towards the right direction. Dr. Payee?
Some tools. I think that COVID sort of put the whole country on timeout. And what we discovered is that we're not really good alone. As we could see by all the rise of all the COVID relationships, people don't want to be alone. It's very hard to be isolated and then to be isolated alone. It's another thing if you have like one other person. So one of the tools is it's a safety net, because no one can cover everything. So whether we're talking about the context of family, the context of relationships, or how do we hold up our children, we have to have a social safety net, because the whole community has to come in and sort of pitch in on what the public health messaging is, but also what is the messaging that we're giving families on how to support this, what's the messaging we're giving people in how to handle these concomitant issues, right? So 3 walkaways. The first one is, don't wait for a call, make a call. The second one is, resist the urge to do nothing. Become engaged. Even if it's hard for you to tune in to this show or to watch your church on video, tune in, because you know what? If you do nothing, it really just sort of deadens the spirit inside of us and increases the isolation. And the last takeaway is that connection is the antidote to depression. And if we don't connect, we become depressed, we become isolated, and the very thing that we need is that social net, that social safety net. And we have got to engage, and we've got to do it. Even when you don't feel like connecting, when we least feel like connecting, those are the times when we need it the most. And we need it Our children need it. Our neighbors need it. Our friends need it. Our community needs it. The elderly, the ones who are forgotten, the ones who, they weren't consistent when there wasn't a pandemic. And, and it's easy to forget them, but I think that we have to draw a circle that's large enough to include everybody, because we all need support at one time or another. And the antidote to depression is connection. I just want to leave that with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Pay. Like what you said, draw a circle wide. Mark Miller, Bishop Flunder, knows that song. He wrote it for the United Methodist Church, but we sing it everywhere. Something else Dr. Pay said, I'm just going to read it. Don't wait for a call. Make a call. Don't wait for somebody to call you. You call them. You text them. You email them. Some kind of connection to them, right? Resist the urge to do nothing. Become engaged. And lastly, but not least, connection is the antidote to depression. So make a connection. Do your best. Thank you so much, Dr. Payee. Lee.
All right. Before I talk tools, I want to address a question that's been lingering out here. I'll just read what it says. It says, how do we encourage parents to keep children at home when a parent tests positive? I was thinking about that, and I think the biggest thing that that I remember from my growth was when I had chickenpox. My brother is 4 years younger than I am. And so I was isolated in my bedroom, and my brother was behind the gate with my mom so that he wouldn't get chickenpox. And I had to get used to the fact that I had to be isolated from the family. I think by helping parents to connect with something like chickenpox, which is communicable, then it would help them to understand that if a parent tests positive in a household, there is a great possibility that other people in the household could test positive. And the protocol is to quarantine, to be tested and then quarantine for 14 days. I know that's difficult for working parents, but we rather err on the side of caution and help parents, overcome barriers to being able to stay at home, get better, and hopefully prevent their children from also contracting COVID. So I think what happens frequently is people make pronouncements to folks. You got to get out of here because you got the COVID. Rather than, asking them, I know you tested positive, how are you handling it? How are you addressing life with your children? And by asking parents questions rather than telling them what to do, really helps them to see that you're a partner with them, and they would be more open to listening to what you have to say versus people who just make pronouncements. Now, as far as tools, one of the biggest buzzwords right now is mindfulness. Everybody's talking about mindfulness. And simply mindfulness is focusing your mind on what's happening right now, and not allow it to either focus on past issues, future worries, that you're able to keep your mind focused on right now. One of the things that I say to my clients that they laugh about is to get a hobby. Hobbies are so old-fashioned. When you ask people, what do you do for fun and for leisure? Nobody much anymore, and I guess I'm getting old. talks about having a hobby. But finding something that you can do that doesn't require the participation of anyone else, even if you have people around you, that you can focus on as a way to shut out the worries about COVID, the worries, the anxiety that's going on. And for just a small amount of time, if you're putting together a model, if you're baking bread, because, you know, we went through this thing in the pandemic where people couldn't get flour because everybody had started baking bread. Those are kinds of things that you can use to center yourself. Where they become therapeutic is in their intentionality, because you could create some, you know, difficult tool for people to use. They really won't use it. The easiest tool is something that people are familiar with, but you help them to understand the therapeutic intent of this tool. Now, you're baking bread, yes, because you like bread, but during the time that you're baking this bread, you're focusing on the bread. You're not focused on COVID, work, how I'm going to handle this, how am I going to handle that. You are focused for that period of time on that activity. And I think that definitely has been a boon to me, is re-exploring some of my hobbies. Cooking is one of them. Photography was another. So I spent a lot of time editing pictures, just to deal with some of the isolation, to deal with some of the times when your mind can get to churning and you can't turn it off. We call it ruminating. When you turn things over and over in your mind, you can't turn it off, especially when it's time to go to bed. A lot of clients complain about, you know, when I get ready to get into bed, I just lay there and toss and turn, and my mind just runs and runs and runs and runs. So having that time during the day that you set aside for yourself to do something that you are intentional about, and it doesn't have to be long if you don't have a lot of time, but if you do have more time, then, you know, set aside an hour or two to do that hobby that you enjoy, or pick up a new hobby. Puzzles are always good. I've been talking to clients about 3D puzzles, which is a new way of thinking about a puzzle that starts off flat and then ultimately it morphs into something that is three-dimensional, that's got little tiny pieces that you put together, much like Legos, but it's a puzzle. Books on tape are another good thing to invest in. If you've never used a book on tape, the first book on tape, or CD now, that I ever heard, or you can stream them, was the autobiography of Malcolm X. It changed the way the words were on the page for me. And I was working in a home for young boys who were sex offenders. And I introduced a young boy there to books on tape because he had difficulty reading. After he got through the first one, he kept asking me to go back to the library and get him another book, because he really enjoyed, one, having someone read to him, and two, just being swept away in the story without having to turn the page, without having to worry about words you can't pronounce. You can just sit back, relax, and be caught up in the story. So that's another way, another tool you can use that's also personal, it's individual. And of course, most of us have explored everything that Netflix has to offer. Prime Video, Disney Plus, you name it, Paramount. We have explored all those options And sometimes you have to take a break from television, especially from the news. Decreasing the amount of news you consume definitely will improve your mood and your anxiety. Because while they are reporting the news, sometimes it seems like it becomes overkill after a while. When you keep having, the daily death toll of how many people succumb to COVID, how many people are in the emergency rooms in your area, can be a little depressing. So if you limit yourself to news once a day or once every other day, or news in a newspaper versus news on television, because news in a newspaper, you have to be an active participant in reading the story versus just sitting back and having someone blast you with information that you may or may not want to deal with. But a newspaper, another old-fashioned thing, would definitely give you a way to control how much information you take in at a given time.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you, Dr. Payee and Lee. You have been wonderful guests on tonight. I'm going to leave last words for Bishop Flunder and Bishop Pearson. You all can decide which one wants to go first.
It shall be Bishop Pearson. He shall have last word.
Go now. All right.
Go.
Go. All right. This is the motto I adopted back in high school. I don't even know where I got it from, but it kept me through a lot of difficult things. Things are never as bad as they seem because they could always be worse. And they're never as good as they seem and could always be better. So the wise person has to find that happy, I say, holy middle place and live there. And don't emphasize what you don't have enough of. Enough means to have as much or as many as required. Emphasize on what you do have enough of. When we were coming up in Southern California as considered poor people, when we didn't have enough food in the house, my mom would find a way. She didn't complain or whine. She would just go there and find out what we did have enough and improvise. I would encourage every person to not count your not enoughs, but count your enoughs. One of the enoughs is enough arguing, enough complaining, enough deadly negative emotion. You have enough of that, so it stops it. Now, use what you have enough of. Flour, sugar, basics. Think of the basics that you have, the basics that you need. Go back to, as they say, go back to basics, and you'll find out that you're much better off than you were. Arguing about masks, especially in front of children, to ignore masks is to ignore the mess. We're in a mess. And even though masks don't cure, for a parent to insist that we don't wear them says to the child and everybody else in the house, ignore the reality, ignore the facts. And that ignorance means that you're not making note of something that could help. So don't argue what you don't have. Argue what you do. Emphasize and amplify what you do. And I think we'll all come out a lot better than it appears that we're going to come out.
Thank you, Bishop. We
Amen.
appreciate it, Bishop Flunder.
That's good last word for me. We just don't put ourselves in a position to fight against this epidemic by pretending that it doesn't exist and thinking that by sheer strength of our will and intention, we can just make it go away. It doesn't work like that. Essentially, you can get as mad at it as you want to. You can deny it as much as you want to. That is not going to make it go away. Let's know what the facts are. Let's find peace in the relationship that we have, both with the science and with our understanding of God. And let's reflect that for our children and those who look to us as leaders. And we will get through this, beloved. Some of us have died and will die. I know that is true. But most of us will not. And we have a hand on making that number larger and larger and larger if we handle this thing with wisdom and understanding and with faith and intention. God is on our side. Please know that. God is on our side. I love you all. Thank you so much for all of your words tonight. People are finding hope all over the internet because of what it is that you've said. God bless you.
Thank you all so much for being such wonderful guests. Again, to Dr. Payee, to Lee Smith, to Bishop Pearson, and of course, Bishop Flunder. We appreciate you. To our Facebook Live audience, our Instagram audience, Twitter, and YouTube. Grateful for your presence here on tonight. We want to make an appeal. We're going to have Bishop Flunder come first at this time.
God bless all of you again, and thank you so very much for being with us this evening. With the gatekeepers, I know that we are having an impact. I know by the way in which you're responding to us and the numbers of people who are connecting when we are together on Wednesday night. I'm eternally grateful to Bishop Pearson and the ways in which he is a part of this gathering, and all of our guests that we together have encouraged to be a part of us. I want to say to you who listen to us and who have been helped, who have been given an opportunity to express your opinions and ideas, but also to receive from others, support the broadcast by sending a donation via Cash App to $TFAM Annual, TFAM ANNUAL, or to PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. Let's keep doing this because we are in this together. Together, we will pass through the veil that is called COVID-19. Help us, support us as we continue in the work. God bless you.
Thank you all so much for joining our broadcast tonight. We want to say thank you again to all of those who are still on Facebook Live and still on YouTube, Instagram, and also on Twitter. We are grateful for your presence. We ask that you join us on next week as we're going to talk about something different on next week. We want you to come, want you to join in. You'll see a flyer about it real soon. We have great guests coming your way. Thank you so much. Have a great week. God bless you.
Very much.